How about you? I'm Hank. Welcome to Hamiltonville Farm. Let's talk about some brush hog basics, and let's talk about why you should consider a brush hog to be your first implement. Let's talk about some of the safety things you need to consider when you're using a brush hog. We'll talk about some of the things that you need to consider while you're out in the field. We'll talk about some differences between brush hogs and other type of mowers. This video is going to cover a lot of stuff, so if you're in the market for a tractor, you're a first-time tractor owner, you're a first-time tractor buyer, and you're in the research phase, I hope this video is going to help you, give you a lot of information. There's a lot of videos out there on YouTube, and so hopefully this is one that will just give you a different type of insight. Rotary cutters, brush hogs, bush hogs, they are a violent implement. I mean, these things are going to be all kind of destructive, right? They're going to slash and cut everything that you run over. They're going to try to anyway, depending on what you're trying to run over. So let's talk about some of the things you need to look for when you are purchasing a bush hog. One thing you need to consider is, how does the bush hog connect to the tractor? So here, this is a Homestead Implements model. This is a Pinnacle series. This is their heavy duty lineup. So this is a Cat 1 or Cat 2 capable bush hog. This Clever style hookup here gives you, this is Cat 1 on this side, where it's not as thick as the pin on this side, but the pin is the same. You can put Cat 2 on this side, so for bigger tractors. And so this Pinnacle series gives you that option here, and there's a lot of implements that do that, but you have to look at some of the things that are the telltale signs of a good bush hog from a kind of an entry-level bush hog. First of all, some of the welds. You can see here that we got welds all the way across. Everything's got solid welds where it needs to have solid welds on it. So look for that. And another feature that you want to look at is, what does the top of the deck look like? What you don't want is, you don't want a bush hog that has a lot of area for water to stand, because water will end up rusting out the top deck, or the top decking of the brush cutter, and you don't want that. So you're going to want a bush hog that's designed to have the water flow off of it when it's parked or whatever, or when it's stationary, if you don't keep it under covered conditions. You're also going to want a bush hog that's got an adjustable tail wheel. This allows you to kind of finesse the deck height of how you want it to discharge the debris and stuff like that. So this is how the Pinnacle series adjusts. It's got the two brackets here. You pull this pin, and then the tail wheel assembly goes up and down depending on your desire, how you want it to go. Or you can actually fold it all the way up and not have a tail wheel. Some people do that. Also, some people use a chain on the top link, and I've seen that before in the past too, but I use a hydraulic top link, and that helps control kind of the pitch of the bush hog itself. You're going to have options on how the debris gets discharged from the brush cutter. You can see here, this is a replaceable mud flap, and it goes across the whole width of the brush cutter. And this is the front side of it, and they also offer it in the back. Now, some of the options you're going to have are chains or nothing. So you have mud flaps, you have chains, or you don't have anything, and that will, obviously that's the worst option, right? You want something that's going to deflect that debris as it leaves or it's ejected from the brush cutter, to keep you and the people around you safe. Keep some of the, like, I've got a buddy of mine who was brush cutting, and literally his truck was parked across the street, took the tractor off the trailer, went and did his brush cutting, and he threw a rock through the window of his truck. So you just got to be careful with that kind of stuff. These things are dangerous. But there's some other considerations you need to look for as well. I highly recommend any brush cutter you get, you opt for the slip clutch, and I'm trying my best to get you in there. The slip clutch is the configuration where the PTO shaft connects to the gearbox. All right, so underneath this is it's a disc of its two clutches. What happens is, when you hit something that's going to stop the blade from spinning, let's say you hit a stump, let's say you hit a big chunk of wood or something that you don't see in the underbrush, or you hit a tree that's laying down or something. Well, obviously the blades that are turning will want to continue to turn. What that slip clutch does is it takes the brunt of that, so when the blades come to that abrupt stop because it hits something that's immobile or stationary, that clutch will slip on each other, and instead of breaking your gearbox, it continues to kind of spin the PTO shaft without breaking anything on the internals, if that makes sense. So the slip clutch is the best way to go. The other configuration is called a shear pin, and what happens there is you put a soft grade, like a number 5 bolt, through a slot, so when the blades hit something that's immobile or stationary, that gearbox still wants to turn. Well, what happens is that bolt will break, and so that it doesn't break the gearbox in there and the PTO was shot. And then the bad part about that is you have to get off your tractor, you have to replace the shear bolt, get back on your tractor, start again. Slip clutch, you just keep on trucking, you know? So I highly recommend whatever you go with a slip clutch, because it's the way better option. It's a little more expensive. It's probably $150, $300 more expensive, but it will save you time and headache to get you a slip clutch versus a shear bolt. The PTO shaft is connected to the tractor via this PTO collar here. This one you just take and you pull back on it. It releases some ball bearings in there. You slide it onto the spline of the PTO shaft of the tractor, and it connects that way. You see some that are a pin style, where you take a pin and you push it in with your thumb and then slide it on there. Either way, they're all aggravating, so it doesn't matter. Unless you have some type of coupler that allows you to connect and disconnect your PTO shaft easier, every time you put a PTO shaft on a tractor, it's aggravating. 9 times out of 10, I run my bush hog on the tractor itself without the quick hitch. But I just had to do some real quick brush hogging the other day, just a little section. So I just I had the quick hitch on it, but I prefer to run my bush hog connected straight to the tractor versus onto a quick hitch. If you're going to use a quick hitch, what you have to think about is your PTO shaft. All right, so your PTO shaft may have to be cut. When you purchase your bush hog, and you attach it to your tractor, you're going to have to match your PTO shaft to your tractor. And so you're going to have to get the distance from that PTO spline to that gearbox. And then you're going to have to cut accordingly. There's tons of videos out there about how to cut a PTO shaft. But if you take your measurements and you don't have your quick hitch on it, then what happens is, if you use a quick hitch, you may have cut your PTO shaft too short. So when you do add a quick hitch, it's not going to connect up front because you've cut your PTO shaft too short. So you run the risk of doing that. So if you ever think you're going to use a quick hitch, go ahead and take your measurement with the quick hitch on it. How many times can I say quick hitch? You're going to look for a gearbox that's going to be powerful enough for the rating of your tractor. And speaking of the rating of your tractor, you're going to look for a bush hog that is the right size, okay? Or the brush cutter that's the right size for your tractor's horsepower. Not your tractor's engine horsepower, your tractor's PTO output horsepower. There's a big difference, because there's a general rule of thumb that you'll read that you get 1 foot for every 5 horsepower. So if you have a 25 horsepower tractor, you can get a 5-foot bush hog, all right? If you have a 30 horsepower tractor, you can get a 6-foot brush cutter. Brush cutter, bush hog, rotary cutter, if you haven't figured it out, they're all interchangeable at this point. So think about that when you are buying your implement. You said, well, my tractor's a 30 horsepower tractor. Well, you might only have 25 horsepower out the PTO, so you're going to need a 5-foot brush hog. That's just generally speaking, that's a good rule of thumb. Can a 30 engine horsepower tractor pull a 6-foot brush cutter? Probably. But the general rule of thumb is, for every 5 horsepower out of your PTO shaft, which is different than your engine horsepower, then you get 1 foot of brush cutter, all right? So a 5-foot brush cutter, 25 horsepower, 25 PTO horsepower. So hopefully that clears up a lot of questions. You'll see that in a lot of tractor groups, a lot of tractor forums. You'll see that question 6 million times, right? You know, hey, I'm a new tractor owner. Will my Branson 5220 pull a 7-foot brush cutter? So think about the general rules. For every 5 horsepower, you get 1 foot of brush cutter, and that should answer your question. Now, if you're going to be doing all kind of stuff in this heavy, thick woods and things like that, that's a different scenario. If you're just going to be brush cutting like pastures or something like that, that's not going to be very taxing on a brush cutter, then you can go up another foot probably and be all right. Talk to your local dealers, talk to somebody that owns the model tractor that you have, see what they're pulling behind it, and that will help you make a better decision as well. Now, do you even need a brush cutter versus another type of cutter? You know, there's flail mowers, there's finish mowers, and then there's brush cutters, right? So what do you really need? Do you need a brush cutter? Do you need a flail mower? Do you need a finish mower? So I think about, look at this field behind me. I mean, it's not exactly a pasture, but it's really smooth. It's nothing but grass. There's no obstacles. So could I get away with a finish mower on that? Take a look at my buddy Tony here. He's driving around with his 45 horsepower tractor, and he's got a finish mower on that. And so, you know, he's using that in those circumstances where he don't have a lot of challenges on that particular piece of property that he's mowing, so he opted to go with the finish mower. If I'm going to take this brush cutter and I'm going to mow this or I'm going to cut this field right here, and then I'm going to go into the woods and finish up some heavy stuff, then a brush cutter is where I need to go. But if all I'm going to do is mow pastures or around my house, or let's say you have 15 acres and you don't have any wooded area, it's all just open land or something, maybe a finish mower or a flail mower is a better option for you. Thinking about your budget, the terrain that you're going to be cutting, and how you're going to be using the implement will help steer your decision on, should I get a brush cutter versus a flail mower or a finish mower. So, but I think a brush cutter is more versatile. Now, it's not going to cut like a lawnmower by any stretch of the imagination, because the blades are blunt and you know, it's not designed to be a lawnmower. But can you get away with cutting some grass with it? Probably. What does a brush cutter look like underneath? Let's take a look. So this is underneath the brush cutter, and if you notice, you got what they call a stump jumper on there. A stump jumper is this big round disc right here, and it does exactly what the name implies. If you hit a stump, that's going to keep going over it, or it's designed to go over the stump without stopping or bogging down, and still allow your blades to turn freely on the stump jumper. So when you're looking for a brush cutter, make sure you get one that's got a stump jumper on it. That's really a good feature to have. Something else you want to think about when you're purchasing a brush cutter. A lot of these tractor dealers will sell these package deals. You can get a bush hog and a box blade and a bucket for, you know, X amount of dollars, plus a trailer and 3 implements or something for a package deal. And everybody wants to finance their implements into that package deal. Okay, I get that, you know, but just think about, you're probably going to get a cheap trailer, and you're probably going to get standard duty implements. And my advice to you would be, don't do it. Don't not get the package deal. Can I say it that way? Don't go for the standard duty stuff. Because let me tell you something, learn from me. I paid that price. Okay, when I got my very first bush hog, I got a standard duty bush hog, and I'm not kidding. The very first time I used it, I went down through here cutting, and I literally was just cutting grass and nothing thick. I mean, it was like literally 1-inch saplings, because I didn't know what I was doing, so I didn't want to get into the thick stuff. And I bent that thing all to pieces. And I'm like, what in the world? And so I called my dealer, and he goes, yeah, that's a standard duty bush hog, man. You can't be doing stuff like that. And I'm like, it was literally like, we call them yo-pons, if you know what those are. I don't know what they call them in other parts of the world, but they're just real. I mean, they're literally 1 inch or less. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, man. And so he's like, nah, man, standard duty. You can't treat them like a you know, a commercial grade stuff. I was very disappointed, very disappointed. So anyway, so get a heavy duty bush hog. You know, if you think about some of the things that you're going to think, I mentioned earlier in the video, these things are violent, man. It's going to be slinging stuff out the bottom of that sucker like you wouldn't. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's going so fast, and it's just violent, yeah? And so you're going to want something that's going to withstand that. And you're going to want a brush cutter that's going to take that torque of the tractor as well, because let's say I got a 55 horsepower tractor here and I'm cruising along. Well, that's a lot of weight pulling this bush hog, right? Well, if I get caught on a stump or whatever, that bush hog is going to come to a sudden stop. If I stop on the stump or something like that it can't go over, that's a lot of torque that is on that brush cutter. That is just, I mean, you know, so you're going to need something. Buy a heavy, I'm telling you, you're like, well, I don't need a heavy duty. All I'm going to do is this field. You're not going to just do that field. All right. You're going to have buddies that you're going to be like, hey, I can come over here and clean that area up for you or whatever. Please, please, please buy something that's not standard duty. You're wasting your money. That's just my personal soapbox. But for all you guys that's got standard duty bush hogs out there, leave a comment below and tell me if you have any regrets buying standard duty, or if you're happy with it. Because I'm only going off my personal experience. Other people who have bought standard duty bush hogs and brush cutters, maybe they're happy with it. I was not, and I've got several buddies who were not happy with the fact that they bought a standard duty brush hog. So you're taking a lot of energy, and you're putting it in, you know, you're localizing it to that gearbox, and those blades are spinning. A lot of things have to go on for that to happen. So the thing that I like to do is I like to actually start my tractor. I turn my PTO on, and then I actually have my engine RPMs about 1,000, somewhere in that range, because on my particular tractor, 2,500 is my 540 PTO RPM. So 2,500 engine RPMs equate to 540 PTO RPMs. What is 540 PTO RPMs? 540 RPMs out of the PTO that's what the gearboxes are designed to rotate at. So that gearbox in your back of your tractor here, it transfers that 2,500 engine RPMs and it reduces it down to 540 PTO RPMs. It's not that simple, but essentially that's what it is, right? So what I do is I start about 1,000 RPMs, and that doesn't shock my system. If I turn on my PTO, I slowly move it up to 1,000 RPMs. I give that gearbox a chance to start moving, and then I pull my RPMs up to 2,500 RPMs at cutting speed, or 540 PTO RPMs. And that's going to reduce that shock and that shock and awe on the gearbox of that brush cutter. And so just think about it. If it's like a sprint, right? If you know, as soon as the guy at the starting line fires the starting pistol, it's like, pew, you take off running. Especially if you're my age, right? You're going to pull a hamstring or something. You just can't take off right off the bat. So what you got to do is you got to ease into it like a marathon. I don't know any other way to equate that. But anyway, so you don't want to shock your system by starting it at 2,500 RPMs, slamming on that PTO, bam, it cranks up. If you have a shear bolt, you have to run a risk of breaking that shear bolt, and you ain't even moved the tractor yet. You ain't even got started on your task for that morning or that afternoon with your brush cutter, because now you're out there replacing shear bolts, right? So my recommendation is to start at a lower engine RPM and then work your way up. There's a lot to think about when you're operating a brush cutter. First, especially if you're the first time, and then we didn't even talk about when you're actually in the woods or you're actually on the property cutting, like you want to get out and you want to walk around the property and look for sinkholes or debris that you need to run over, especially if you're cutting stuff that's chest high or waist high or whatever. You probably need to get out there and walk it first to make sure there's no surprises when you're out there. And we didn't talk about having a cab versus non-cab. We didn't talk about cleaning your radiator every 30 minutes when you're out there bush hogging. That's something you need to think about. So let's talk about it. That brush cutter is going to create a lot of dust and a lot of debris. And so what happens is, when you're making your circles or you're making your passes or whatever, however you're cutting your particular stretch of the property that you're cutting, you're going to collect all that stuff in your radiator. So I actually take a blower with me on a lot of cases, like a cordless blower, leaf blower, and I'll blow out my radiator, or I stop every 30 minutes, every 45 minutes, and I wipe off my radiator, my grill, and I check it and I make sure, and I keep a constant eye on my temperature gauge, because I'm telling you, the last thing you want to do is overheat your tractor bush hogging, and it's easy to do. And I also, then sometimes, I don't do it every time, but I also, when I get out every 30 minutes or so to clean up the radiator and stuff, I may or may not take the air filter out, tap it on the side of my loader here and get some of that dust off of it. But I will do it A, before I start the process, and B, after I'm done, for sure, 100% all the time. But sometimes I even do it, depending on the conditions, I even take my air filter out and bang it against the side of my loader to try to get some of the debris out of there, because I don't want my tractor to overheat. So that's something that you need to consider as well. You need to think about yellow jackets or bees in the ground, whatever you got at your particular location, snakes, bees, limbs, if you're going to be cutting down in the woods, if you got a cab tractor, a lot of things. You got to keep your head on a swivel for sure. So a lot of things to consider when you're brush hogging. It's not an easy process. It's one of my favorite things to do on a tractor, to be honest with you. I love bush hogging. It's just satisfying seeing all that big stuff go, get schwacked off. It's pretty awesome. I hope this gives you a lot of food for thought. Hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Take care. God bless.